I am King County Executive Dow Constantine. Last November, King County voters overwhelmingly approved Best Starts for Kids. It's a 6-year levy that I proposed that will transform the way we invest in our children's future to deliver better outcomes for our entire community. Today, I am proud to announce that that is exactly what we are doing, starting with the very first initiative, one that will prevent children and families from becoming homeless. It's based on a highly successful pilot project that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, one that helped families who had survived domestic violence and urgently needed a safe place to live but couldn't afford housing. The results are stunning. 96% of those who participated in the pilot project had housing 18 months after entering the program. 76% needed only minimal services after those 18 months. Their project, which was coordinated by the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, is a textbook example of how to apply a client-centered, prevention-oriented approach to achieve the outcomes we all want to see. Case managers start with a simple question. What do you need to stay housed? Then we can better customize our response to the specific needs of each family. That can include things like paying for a mom's commercial driver license so that she can continue to earn a living, or providing clothes for that important job interview, or even help with the first month's rent. These small investments not only cost much less than providing shelter, but they prevent children from suffering the trauma that the fear and uncertainty of homelessness can cause. That's trauma that we now know can have a permanent impact on that child's brain development. And when parents and caregivers can spend less time worrying about simply whether their kids will have a warm, safe place to sleep tonight, they're able to focus on that child's long-term happiness and well-being. And that's really my ultimate goal with Best Starts for Kids, to not only reduce negative outcomes in our community, whether it's homelessness or addiction or mental illness, but really to increase the number of kids who grow up healthy and reach adulthood ready to fully participate, to flourish, and to fulfill their potential. So I recently sent the King County Council my proposal for this strategy, which will include $19 million in funding paid for by the brand new Best Starts for Kids levy. I know council members share my commitment to transitioning to upstream solutions like this one. That includes Councilmember Claudia Balducci, whose district includes Bellevue and who is here with us today. I encourage the council to not only approve the plan, but focus on adhering to the model that was proven so successful during the pilot project. After all, that is the point of a pilot project, to be innovative, to measure the performance, and to show what works. For us to deliver the same outcomes, we need to take the same approach. I want to thank everyone who participated in the pilot project, including our host today, LifeWire, for creating a successful model that we can apply now across King County as your regional government. And I want to thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for making the pilot project possible. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce David Wertheimer, who is the Deputy Director of the Pacific Northwest Initiative for the Gates Foundation. David.
Thank you, Executive Constantine. I'm David Wertheimer from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today. You know, one would think that prevention is really the most effective way to reduce homelessness. And it sounds pretty obvious. Obvious, but more easily said than done. There's actually years of research that shows that efforts to prevent families from becoming homeless have been largely ineffective in the past. It's a lot harder than it may seem to predict accurately which families will become homeless, which families won't, and to provide the right help at the right time in the right ways for specific families. We've had very inefficient prevention efforts historically over time. But I'm happy to say that per what the executive was talking about, in a very important area, we have proven that there actually is a way to prevent many families from becoming homeless, and to do that effectively and efficiently. After a 3-year pilot project that the Gates Foundation funded, we have evidence that shows clearly how innovative, flexible prevention efforts can really work. It's called the Domestic Violence Housing First Pilot Project. And it tested a very different way to boost housing stability, health, and overall safety of children and adults who've lived through domestic violence and abuse. We know, nationally and locally, that domestic violence is one of the leading causes of family homelessness across the nation. So we decided to focus on how we could best assist people served by agencies that help survivors of domestic violence to not become homeless, to find safe, stable housing. What our partners found is that by focusing on just 3 things, 3 basic elements, they could prevent adults and their children who were survivors of domestic violence from becoming homeless. And I'd like to just recognize a couple of the real sort of pioneers and leaders of this work that are in the room today. Linda Olson from the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, who leads this effort across a cohort of domestic violence agencies that are working on this issue. Pradipta Upadhyaya from Interim Community Development, the new official executive director, and Barbara Langdon from LifeWire, all of whom were integral in making this work successful. So what do you do? Well, first, we focused on making sure families have safe and secure housing first, before we focused on all of the other issues that survivors of domestic violence may face. When we focus on housing first, all of the other issues become considerably easier to begin to address and solve. Next, as Dow indicated, agency advocate staff ask families a very simple question. What is it you need right now to remain stably and safely housed? Finally, providers customize the support that's offered to these families. When agencies have the flexibility and the flexible resources to meet individual needs quickly and responsively, tailored to each family's situation, the ability to prevent homelessness skyrockets. Sometimes families need help paying their rent for a month, or installing a lock, or putting up drapes to ensure their privacy at night, or making a utility payment. Other times, they may need a bit more help. This flexible but focused approach has shown astounding results. As Executive Constantine referenced, 96% of the participants who received services for at least 18 months were able to stay in a permanent home the entire time. That outcome far outstrips virtually every other intervention that we use to end homelessness. Housing first, rapidly housing a family quickly works. This approach also allows families some breathing room and a chance to put their energy into keeping their jobs, staying in school, focusing on their own well-being, on being a family, and doing what families do best. Most importantly, children in the pilot programs had a safe place to call home, a place they could play, a place they could learn, a place they could be children, kids, without the fear of further abuse and without the added trauma of homelessness. Executive Constantine is modeling the Kids and Youth Family Homelessness Prevention Initiative after this Domestic Violence Housing First project. And expanding this effort to a broader range of homeless families is a really essential next step in taking this work of housing first to scale. You know, we read stories every day in the paper. We see everywhere we go in our communities more and more people, it appears, becoming homeless. And sometimes it doesn't seem to be getting any better. Because once a person becomes homeless, it only gets really harder and harder to stabilize and obtain a permanent home. But it doesn't need to get to that complex combination of crises if we can provide housing first. The Domestic Violence Housing First model keeps more children, young people, and families out of homelessness and allows them to succeed in whatever path parents prioritize for themselves and for their kids. From my perspective, having many, many years ago run a domestic violence program and shelter in New York City, that's a much healthier, much more empowering response than sending a family into a shelter system. This approach, finally, is very efficient and effective. The cost of rapidly placing families in housing first costs much, much less than an extended stay in shelter. It's really efficient. It's really effective. It saves money, and most importantly, it saves lives. I'd like now to introduce King County Councilwoman Claudia Balducci, who is on her home turf here, and it's a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here in my neighborhood, that's where I live, to talk about this great new initiative, because we see here in Bellevue, as all over the East Side, the juxtaposition of great economic prosperity and growth with not enough affordable housing and rising homelessness. Homelessness is a regional problem. It's not just one city's problem, and we need a regional solution. So I'm very excited that we're using some of the regional dollars from the Best Starts for Kids levy to help prevent people from becoming homeless, especially youth and families here in Bellevue and around the county. Every night, people in cities like Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond don't have a stable place to stay. And they're sleeping in transitional housing, in homeless shelters, on their friend's couch, in doorways, or on the streets, or tucked away in our trails and our parks. Many of these are families with children. In 2015, roughly 75 families with 125 youth were newly homeless, defined as entering the system within the last 2 years. Youth homelessness is often the result of conflict at home, and homeless youth come from every zip code on the East Side. I just want to tell you a quick story about one young person who we know who could have avoided homelessness if there had been more support at the right time. Her name is Rachel. She's 21 years old, and she grew up with a single mother here in Bellevue. At age 19, she went to Job Corps when she finished her high school diploma and studied medical administration. But when she finished Job Corps, she had no job, no place to live, and for safety reasons could not move in with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. Rachel couch surfed for months before finding a shelter at the Landing, operated by Friends of Youth, which is a great local organization, in November 2014. She began working with case management and got a full-time job, moved into transitional housing, and is now stably housed and employed, and she's planning on attending Bellevue College to study business. So while that's one of many stories on the East Side here of a youth who became homeless and found her way back out again, but it didn't have to happen, and her path could have been much easier with programs like the Youth and Family Homelessness Prevention Initiative. Fortunately, we have organizations like LifeWire here to help us tackle the problems we face on the East Side and in the county. Since 1982, LifeWire has provided safety, life-changing programs, and supported services to more than 127,000 survivors and their children throughout their individual journey. That LifeWire is a part of this new approach is not at all surprising to me, because LifeWire was the first organization in Bellevue to provide services to domestic violence survivors when it started in 1982. And they've been embracing innovative approaches ever since. So I'm delighted to be here and to introduce Barbara Langdon, the executive director, who we will hear from, who's been leading the organization for how many years now? 10 years, and is retiring and leaving us. So, Barbara Langdon.
Not leaving, I'm just retiring. There you go.
Is that yours? All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Welcome, everyone. You're at LifeWire. We're so pleased to have you here. Best kept secret in town. And special thanks to David and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for providing LifeWire the opportunity to create an exciting new concept called Domestic Violence Housing First. This innovative program keeps survivors of domestic violence out of homelessness. That's the goal. LifeWire has been given the unique opportunity to trust our clients and ask for what they need. What do they need to survive and thrive? They know what they need. It's up to us to listen. The old adage that we are all one paycheck away from homelessness is still so very true, especially for survivors of domestic violence. Costly emergency shelters are not always the only answer. Sometimes it is as simple as getting a license for a client to get a new job, or clothing so that she can present herself, or locks on a house. Sometimes it's that easy. LifeWire's innovative culture asks the question that's been mentioned before: what do you need and how can we help? Our services are 100% survivor driven. 35 years ago, when I started this work at the age of 10, we had about 2 or 3 choices for survivors: hotline, support group, shelter. That was it. We said, which one of those do you want? The flexibility now that we have to fund our survivors' true needs is critical to ending homelessness. It's imperative that we use flexible funds to get survivors safe. We listen to thousands and thousands of folks who call our helpline. Our clients are young, old, educated, poor, wealthy, but they all have the same need. They need safe housing and a fresh start. Thank you to Executive Constantine for the vision and tenacity to encourage and advocate for best starts for kids. A bold new way of doing business. King County is making national history. We are providing a cost-effective program to end homelessness. It's really quite simple. Ask the question, what do our survivors need? Trust their answer, and deliver thoughtful services to keep our clients safe. A novel approach, perhaps, but it works. Thank you. And I am introducing one of my favorite people, Maria, who is our program director, is here to share a story with you.
Thanks, Barbara. Good morning. As Barbara said, keeping vulnerable families from becoming homeless has the power to save lives. A great example of how flexible homelessness prevention funding and services has done exactly this is Selena's story. Selena has 4 children, ages 5 to 17 years old, and fled to Washington, leaving the abusive father of those children. When she arrived, with LifeWire's help, she was able to rent an apartment and find a good job here in King County. Things were going well for Selena and her children until she began dating a man she met at work. He moved in with her, and the relationship turned violent. Selena called LifeWire, terrified that she and her 4 children would have to again become homeless, need to live out of her car or stay in a shelter, rather than continue to live with an abusive partner. The domestic violence advocate that she spoke with at LifeWire told her that they could together work to find an emergency shelter space, but that would take time, as DV shelters are often full. The advocate told her that instead, LifeWire could help her find a new apartment, allowing the family to avoid homelessness altogether. Selena was so relieved and worked with an advocate to find an apartment close to work and to her children's schools. LifeWire was able to use flexible funds to pay the deposit and the first month's rent on her new family's home. LifeWire also paid for daycare for a couple of months to make sure that Selena was able to achieve financial stability. Prior to the Domestic Violence Housing First initiative that's been mentioned today, we would not have been able to provide these services to Selena. Her options would have been emergency shelter or homelessness. The Domestic Violence Housing First initiative changed how LifeWire provides services, being able to listen to the needs of a family and truly respond, providing unique and individualized solutions to meet the family's immediate safety needs and set a platform for stable housing. Now, nearly a year later, Selena and her children are stably housed. A DV advocate visits Selena's home, providing emotional support and helping her connect to resources. Flexible funding paired with customized services keeps vulnerable families supported. Families experiencing trauma and risk of homelessness need barriers removed from assistance, and individualized services with little to no requirements on the family to receive that assistance result in long-term stability. This model of client-centered services has allowed Selena and her children to be safe, to avoid homelessness, and to live the healthy life that Selena had imagined for her and her children. LifeWire's flexible homelessness prevention funds eliminate the fear of homelessness as a reason to stay in an abusive relationship. Survivors and others living at risk of homelessness deserve stable housing. The Kids, Youth, and Family Homelessness Prevention Initiative will keep these most vulnerable youth and families avoiding homelessness and thriving, just like Selena and her children. Thank you.
Thanks to all of our speakers, and thanks to all of you for being here today. Any of us would be happy to take your questions.
How does this work in an environment where it's difficult to find any housing, much less that can be subsidized?
Well, I will let some of those who participated in the pilot speak a little bit to that. But again, if we're able to keep people in their current housing by helping them with a short-term financial challenge, for example, that is far less expensive even than moving them to other private housing, let alone having them fall into homelessness. It's the notion that you can customize your interventions rather than assuming we can create a one-size-fits-all solution, because everyone's situation is different, everyone's life is different. And to have the ability to use these flexible funds in a responsible way to respond directly to the needs in that family's life provides us the most efficient way to keep them out of homelessness and to reduce harm. Would anyone who participated in the pilot like to speak to that?
I'll just say that affordable housing is a critical issue. It's imperative that we provide more affordable housing. People need to live where they work, and it's very hard. I just need to say our staff have become amazing at finding landlords that will rent on a lower income level, or even for somebody that, for example, has a past eviction notice, or staff, I think we'll say, have become very clever and very creative about finding that housing. Did you want to say?
So I think in the case of interim CDA, since we work largely with a very, very large immigrant refugee population that have very unique needs in trying to navigate the system and get access to services that are available, what we've been able to do is build really strong relations with landlords that we know within the community, especially in the Chinatown ID area. And it's been interesting to see that, very often because the women are single, there are lots of issues around the willingness to help them stay in those apartment buildings. So for the longest time, I know that Carol, who is, the main person who introduced this program to interim, what she and her team had been able to do was make sure that the lease was with interim and the landlord, as opposed to having the client be responsible for anything. And so it really built a lot of trust and confidence, because it was like, okay, there's an organization behind this client, and the organization is responsible for anything that may happen to the client, or any dealing with the client had to be done through us. And I think that model worked really, really well. And there's also, especially when you're working with immigrant refugee women that are survivors of domestic violence, there's a level of comfort for them to be able to be in the neighborhood that they're familiar with. People are speaking their language. They're able to relate to the landlords. So it's been a wonderful way for us to be able to reach out and really provide the services that are required for a very unique community that we serve. Thank you.
Others?
So who will be taking the lead on this project, and will the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation be involved?
First of all, we have with us, and I forgot to mention, several experts from county and regional government. And Adrienne Quinn is here. She's the head of our Department of Community and Human Services, and I'd like her to come explain the structure of this.
Thank you. We will be partnering with many of the folks that you see here today because of the work the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence did in ensuring this program's success. We will be contracting with the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, some of the agencies that you see here today, to help make sure that as we roll this model out, there's fidelity to the model, the things that they learned along, the culture change within the organization in terms of being extremely client-centered and flexible in how they help survivors will be one that we will model. So these will be our partners initially in the program as we bring more partners from the community into this program as well.
It was mentioned that flexible funding keeps coming up. So how is, at the county level, how is that administered?
That's your department. Come on.
Thank you. And so the flexible funding will be administered by the agencies. And so the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the other agencies that you see here today will participate in helping other organizations understand how you are both flexible and also how you ask critical questions about, will this really help ensure that you remain stably housed. And so we will be doing an RFP process to select requests for proposals. So we will be doing a competitive process to invite other agencies in.
And I hope David Wertheimer can tell us a little bit more about Gates' continuing commitment.
Yes, the Gates Foundation is continuing its investments in the domestic violence housing first work. And what we're doing now is we're working in partnership with the Washington State Coalition and Linda and the extraordinary leadership that the coalition has brought to this work, and the cohort providers in the program and the county to take the work from individual agency and organizational level pilots to a systemic level scale. And that's one of the things that's represented in this conversation today, is how do you move from a pilot project where a group of providers have demonstrated that something really works to a scalable model that can impact an entire community. That's work that we're investing in, that's work we're very interested in, and it's work we're really excited to be doing together with Linda and her team at the coalition.
And I wanted to ask, this, just so I understand, it started with a pilot project to address the needs of people who are domestic violence victims, and now it's expanding to deal with other people. What other people? And if the question is, what do you need, who do you now ask that question of?
You're going to have to come back. But again, in addition to going from a limited pilot to a county-wide effort, it's going from focusing on victims of domestic violence to people who have other challenges that are causing them to teeter on the brink of homelessness. And we know there are, as I said, all families are different, so there are a range of challenges, but we believe that the approach is one that will work for many of those challenges.
Do they come to you, or do you go looking for them?
We will, the intent of the program is to make sure that there is a strong communications plan so that people are aware of the resources. And so the county will not be actually administering the program, but we will be responsible for the evaluation and making sure that the program is successful. And so it'll be community-based agencies like the ones that you see before you today. We'll also be making strong partnerships with the schools, because frequently the schools are aware of what families are unstably housed or what young people might be about to come out, for example, and maybe running away from home. And so we'll have strong partnerships with the schools as well.
And although what do you need is a great question, how far are you willing to take the solution? I mean, locking the door is one thing, but what if the answer is I need heart surgery or something?
Well, part of it is that making linkages with other programs. And so as you heard Maria's example, LifeWire did not do every step and take care of every single need, but connected with other programs. And that's why the importance of the case manager is so important here, to have a case manager that is client-centered and works to advocate for what that individual needs, versus the menu option saying, here's 3 potential menu options, and you can only have one of these things. One of these 3 things.
Adrian, could you say again what your title is?
Yes, Director of King County Department of Community and Human Services.
Mouthful.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Then we do one.
I just wanted to say that the approach that Adrian just described is one that we're trying to take in a lot of our work at county government. You asked who's in charge, right? Well, we are raising the funds, and we are creating the criteria and the rigor. We're saying what the outcomes are we want. But in order for us to succeed as a community, we need to have all of our partners aligned around our shared goals, and each of their circles of contacts participating. That is the way in which we're going to be able to solve these difficult problems, not by government doing things like it used to do, identifying a problem, creating a program or an agency, opening one door and expecting people to find us. And this has worked for us in signing people up for health care and signing people up for low-income bus fares in a number of areas, and it's going to work for us here as well.
Executive Constantine, and perhaps David can also chime in on this one. What do you think has taken so long in getting a program like this going? I mean, LifeWire has been doing this kind of work for decades. What do you think has been the problems in the past?
Well, I'll let others weigh in, but I will tell you exactly the challenge that county government has been dealing with, and I think other local governments, as funds have been reduced and reduced and reduced, including through the 1% cap on property taxes. We've had to cut and cut and cut, and we've been left simply responding to problems, responding to crises, dealing with an emergent issue, and neglecting the very clear need to, again, move upstream and start investing in prevention, which is less expensive for the public and which prevents the kinds of harm that evidence themselves much later on in the problems that we're seeing in the justice system and the mental health system. That is what Best Starts for Kids is about. It's creating this space for us to start solving problems before they start, rather than reacting to them much later. I would be glad to have anyone else weigh in on that. No?
Can I just answer your question real quickly? So I'm fortunate enough to sit on the youth advisory board that's supporting this initiative. And when we were talking about taking it from a domestic violence point of view to a larger perspective, the question we ask is, who are the people that see the people that are almost homeless? So is it a nurse who the little boy hasn't had food? Is it a school teacher that he's out of school too often? So what we're looking for are those primary groups that see the people that are one step away. And being able to take this model, use what we've learned from it, and then advance it to other places so that we have a more pervasive look at the whole problem. Yeah.
I want to thank you all. We'll be available for individual interviews, but this is a very exciting moment for King County, and none of this would be possible without all of our community partners here today. So thank you to all of you very much.